Most people think they need a huge garden to eat seasonally all year, but that is not the case. It can happen in a small garden with strategic planting and succession crops. Downsizing from a larger space has let me take advantage of the benefits of a smaller one. It's easier to manage, more productive, and less overwhelming. Let's make the most of a small space for year-round food with the simple strategies to grow the right amount per person, maximize each season's harvests, and store it without lots of work. Before you start planting, it's so important to think about what you actually eat, how much you need, and how to maximize your space. A well-planned garden can feed your family without feeling overwhelming. A common mistake is going too big too fast. A well-managed small garden will always outperform a large, unmanageable one. 2 decades ago, I started with container gardening on my deck in Michigan, growing lettuce, peas, and even peppers and tomatoes in an upside-down tomato planter. Later, I expanded to a raised bed garden that was the perfect size to maintain, but after upsizing to 28 raised beds on 3.5 acres with my now former husband, I learned the hard way that a massive garden can lead to overwhelm and wasted time and even food. Now I'm back to a smaller, more manageable space, and it's working better than ever. Choosing varieties that are suited to your climate and sunlight levels means less struggle and better yield. Summer crops that do well in a short growing season include radishes, arugula, lettuce, spinach, kale, and beans, while crops that thrive in a longer growing season would typically include tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, peppers, melons, and okra. Paying attention to the time it takes for crops to mature and the length of your growing season is key. Prioritizing multi-use crops really helps to increase the value of harvests. For example, beets with delicious greens. Foods that can be eaten fresh and stored for later give you more flexibility. Broccoli is so easy to steam and freeze for later, and in many regions it can be planted twice, once for a summer harvest and once for a fall or winter harvest. Winter squash can be cured and stored for months, and summer squash can be made into freezer meals. Whole beans or bush beans can be eaten fresh and be left to dry on the plants for use in recipes later. So many options here. Making a list of the foods you actually like to eat and how much, and taking into account how nutrient rich and expensive they are to buy, can help reduce the grocery bill and figure out what to grow. Herbs, salad greens, peppers, blueberries, and strawberries are just a few examples of expensive foods you can harvest right out of your own space. Then you have the highest quality with a lower price tag. Keeping a garden journal with how much you harvest from each plant helps you plan better each year and avoid growing too much or too little. Some crops produce more food in less space than others. For example, one pepper plant can produce 50 small peppers, where root veggies like beets can produce 9 beets and greens per square foot. When you research how many plants per person are needed to meet your needs, you'll find averages to get you started, but the most valuable information you'll ever get will be from your own garden journal. With the right techniques, even a small garden can produce enough to feed your family by making the most of the space. Growing up instead of out saves space and improves air circulation. I use trellises for peas, cucumbers, beans, and I've even used them for sugar baby watermelons. By using a trellis, you can also improve air circulation, which can help reduce diseases and give you better harvests. Growing fast-growing crops like lettuce between slower-growing ones like tomatoes makes every inch of space more valuable. Otherwise called intercropping, growing different crops that have different growth habits increases yield in the garden by making use of the space that the single crop wouldn't have. So the fast-growing lettuce, or radishes would work too, will be slowing down by the time the larger tomato plants need to take up that space. Another example would be planting radishes between rows of carrots, which would be harvested before the carrots need that space. Companion planting is a type of intercropping, but with a focus on how the plants benefit each other, like repelling pests or attracting beneficial insects. Succession planting is a little more well known in the home garden, I feel like, but the strategy is a little different than intercropping, as it involves planning ahead so the space never sits empty. An example is planting early in the season with cool season crops, and as those crops are harvested, replacing them with warm season crops and returning to cool season crops again in the fall, so that the garden is continually in production. You could harvest your spinach, replace it with cucumbers, and then replace those with kale for the fall. Or instead of planting all your lettuce seeds at once, you can stagger your plantings every couple of weeks so you have plants at different stages to ensure continuous harvest until the weather changes. However, my preference is using the cut and come again method and then succession planting with either heat tolerant lettuce or a different summer crop altogether. Let me show you what this actually looks like in my 1,000 square foot space. I have my raised bed space so I can accompany them with grow bags and move them around. I also have a little wheelbarrow that I can fit between the beds. Next to my raised beds, I have a 10 by 10 metal storage shed, which is going to keep everything running efficiently. Quick Tent is the same company that makes my greenhouse, which I absolutely love, and they were kind enough to send me this shed. It's going to help me keep my garden essentials close by and organized without cluttering up my growing space. Plus, I'm planning to build compost bins right next to it, so everything I need is going to be in one place. Let's start with this 3x8 bed where every square foot has a purpose, packed with nutrient-dense, high-value foods. There are 6 squares of broccoli, which will produce 6 to 8 inch heads and side shoots a little later, 4 squares of beets with 9 in each, 2 squares of densely planted bunching onions, a white variety and a red one, 3 squares of spinach that has already germinated, and 3 squares of cold hardy lettuce that's already growing. I succession planted more lettuce in the 6 remaining squares to spread it out and have more harvest until everything is done in June, and then I'll be planting butternut squash, which is a nutrient-packed storage crop for winter. In this 4x8 bed, I'll be planting 4 cucumber plants to grow up the trellis, and in the next 11 squares, 44 sweet corn plants with 4 plants per square. In another 4 squares, I'll be planting scallop squash, whose plants have a more compact, bushier growth habit, and then 1 pumpkin plant to take up the adjacent 4 squares. That's going to have some space to trail outside of the bed. And then in the remaining 8 squares, there'll be 2 zucchini plants, which will grow quickly and fill that space up, but I'll stake them and prune the bottom of the plants below the blossoms to keep them growing more vertically to save some space. Having both cucumbers and squash may attract pests that would go after both, so I have them separated by a few feet, and I'll put grow bags of basil nearby to try to help deter at least some of those. In the next 4x8 bed, there will be another 4 cucumber plants growing up the other side of the trellis, and I'll probably need to prune them because 8 plants total might be kind of tight. Next, 4 squares of bush beans, followed by 2 eggplant, and then heat-tolerant lettuce on either side. Next, another row of bush beans, followed by 3 squares of bunching onions and a square of bush beans. Then another row of bush beans and another row of heat-tolerant lettuce, and 3 more squares of bunching onions and 1 last square of lettuce. The final 4x8 bed will have 2 beefsteak tomato plants, 1 cherry tomato plant, and lettuces in between that'll be shaded by the tomato plants as they fill out. I'll harvest the lettuce as cut and come again for as long as it'll grow before getting really bitter in the heat. I may succession plant more of that if space allows around these tomato plants. In this 2x9 blue bed right here, I think I'll have 2 jalapeno plants, 2 Anaheim pepper plants, 4 sweet bells, 2 cayenne, and 1 cherry tomato plant on the end right there. I should mention that my indeterminate tomato plants will be pruned to keep them under control and for good air circulation. I'm really excited about my new Garden in Minutes trellises that fit right into the watering grid, which helps keep this bed organized and tidy. In my new 3x6 bed right here that I still have to fill up, I'm about to start potatoes in April. I was going to grow potatoes in grow bags, but I now have other plans that I'll share in just a minute. I have 3 4-foot round strawberry beds over here, which deserve a whole video to themselves because I need to show you how they're little gold mines, but I just planted these runners from plants I originally planted years ago, and I'm planning on keeping the rotating routine going through the years. These 2 4-foot round beds will be pollinator beds full of native perennials. This 2x9 bed has 4 blueberry bushes, all prolific varieties, including 2 perpetual ones that are going to bloom twice to provide twice as much fruit in their space. To continue on with fruit, I'm going to be experimenting with space-saving techniques and having more control by using grow bags. I'll plant 1 of each variety of melons in each grow bag and let them trail around this area over here where I'm going to cover with really thick mulch to help keep weeds out. I've had a lot of success with cantaloupe in a 4x8 raised bed before, and we literally just trim the plants with a riding lawnmower along with the grass around the bed, so I know they can be pruned to save space. This year I'll be growing watermelons that have smaller and less seeds, so there will be less waste. And all of these melons are all heirlooms, so I can save the seeds and grow again. I'm planning on removing the cover from my 10x20 greenhouse and attaching trellis netting to the frame to grow pole beans, and I'm planning on planting sunflowers along one side to attract pollinators and for the seeds. And last but not least, I'll have more grow bags going with parsley, basil, chive, cilantro, lemon balm, dill, mint, and I've also started some lavender seeds. I almost forgot to show you my grow bags of garlic that I started last October. Garlic stores so well after curing and will last until I harvest it next year. It's the first year I've planted it in grow bags, and I'm hoping to have a great harvest and some good seed garlic to plant in the fall. I've been replanting this garlic right here for years. Super high value crop. Even though most of these summer crops aren't even planted yet, I'm already thinking about what I'll be tearing out in order to eat from the garden year round. One of the hardest but most important decisions in a self-sufficient garden is knowing when to pull summer plants, even if they're still producing. And for me, that decision happens around mid-August. Many summer plants like tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers can keep producing into fall, but leaving them too long means missing the chance to plant a productive fall garden. And I've done this several times where I've planted too late for broccoli broccoli to form heads or for carrots to mature before winter. Saying goodbye to crops like zucchini that may still be producing also lessens pest pressures, which are high in late summer and early fall. There's a second round of many cool season crops that can be planted during the late summer for fall and winter harvest, and examples include broccoli, carrots, radishes, beets, and salad greens. The quick maturing ones will grow for fall harvesting, but others, especially certain greens, will keep growing through the winter under protection. My unheated greenhouse will play a key role to extend my growing season, allowing me to keep harvesting fresh greens through the winter. If your ground doesn't freeze, it acts as a refrigerator for carrots that can be harvested all winter. For this to happen though, they need to mature before winter because they grow very slowly, if at all, when the days shorten. So while only some crops are growing through the winter, how do we make sure we still have food from the summer harvests? Part of eating seasonally during winter months is enjoying the foods that were preserved using simple methods during the summer and fall. I emphasize simple methods because I used to can hundreds of jars of food and it takes so much time, and for me the joy gets sapped from it if it becomes overwhelming. The easiest two methods in my opinion are freezing and curing. Garlic, onions, and summer squash can be stored for months after proper curing. Freezing obviously requires freezer space, but some things can be stored flat to maximize space, like in individual portion sizes. My favorite way to preserve broccoli is to steam it and freeze it in portion sizes my family eats. I've frozen hundreds of pounds of tomatoes to use in sauce and salsa and lots of other recipes. I dice peppers and freeze them in flat portions like the broccoli. I shred zucchini and make freezer meals like my kids' favorite zucchini enchiladas. Sweet corn can be frozen, as well as of course blueberries and strawberries. Melons can be cut up and frozen to enjoy through the winter and in smoothies. Root vegetables like carrots, beets, and potatoes store well in a cool, dark, and slightly damp space using containers like cardboard boxes or plastic bins layered with sand, sawdust, or peat moss. Here in South Carolina, I finally live in a house that has a basement like I had in Michigan, so I'm excited that my chances of successfully storing root veggies will be higher. I have an inexpensive countertop dehydrator that I use for my herbs, and I also like to dehydrate some of the peppers. We eat as many fresh beans as we can during the summer and then leave lots of them on the plants to dry out, and I'll use those to make lots of different hearty winter meals. It's easy to think you need a massive garden to grow enough food to eat year-round, but that's just not true. A well-planned smaller space can actually be more productive and easier to manage than a larger one. I learned that the hard way when I scaled up to a huge garden and found myself overwhelmed, stretched too thin, and even felt a sense of isolation. Now that I've downsized, my smaller garden is not only going to produce more food, but it'll also better fit into my life. I can't reinforce this enough. Don't go too big, too fast. Overwhelm is one of the fastest ways to lose motivation and joy in the garden. Your garden should work for you, not the other way around. It's meant to be a source of nourishment and peace and not stress. Finding that balance between productivity and manageability is key to making gardening a sustainable part of your lifestyle. By focusing on strategic planting, succession crops, and maximizing every inch of space, you can create a highly productive garden that provides food all year round without it taking over your life. A manageable, thoughtfully planned garden will give you the confidence to grow more each season and the freedom to actually enjoy it. After all, gardening isn't just about the harvest, it's about the process, the connection to the earth, and the peace it brings. If you're feeling overwhelmed or unsure where to start, just remember that small and strategic wins the race. Please hit subscribe and follow along because I'd love to grow and learn together with you in the garden.